This is part 5 of our introduction to user experience design, also the final part. And in this we're going to look at some aspects as to how we think and process information and the implications therefrom in terms of how we design our apps. So how people think is actually quite a fascinating subject, and I suppose intuitively we all think, we know how we think. It's something we do, day in, day out. The reality is it is considerably more subtle in terms of some of the particular ways that we process information or the tendencies that we have. We're going to look at a few sort of reasonably obvious ones within this, and then sort of linking them into things like interface design. Start off first of all with the notion of mental models. So fundamentally, when we are approaching or doing a particular activity, we will have in our minds, and we will actively use a mental model, a set of expectations about how we think this thing ought to work, or how things how we expect them to behave. It's based on our prior experiences of that activity or related things to that activity, also our expectations of what it is we want to get out of that. And one of the things we can do here is actually adhering to, if you like, commonly established and commonly shared mental models. So things like interface design, if we think about that, and let's say your typical dialog boxes for, as I say, search icons, or if you want to offer the user a number of different options about how they might be laid out or grouped, or if you want to confirm some information. There's a number of standard ways that interface designers tend to use to do these. And there are also ways that users will have established then as recognizable and broadly acceptable, if you like, mental models. So when we are designing our interface, we want to adhere to these established norms, as it'll make it considerably more easy then for the user, because they will have an awareness of how it is our program will work, because they've used other ones in the past and this is how they have worked. We like to think that we can multitask, and the reality is we can't really. Now, a little bit of sort of contextualization to this. There are some things we can multitask for. And if you're talking about, say, a physical activity, for example, driving a car, and is one that we have repeated quite a lot, so it's something we can almost do effortlessly, so there's not little conscious effort required. In that case, we can do something, sort of requires physical activity, as long as it doesn't require much active mental processing, and in that case, you can do a little bit of multitasking. But for two activities that demand conscious effort, things that we have to direct our attention towards, in that sense, we can only really direct our attention to one at any one point in time. We almost get ourselves in a situation similar to a single core processor, where you have to devote a little bit of time to one activity, jump onto the other, and then keep jumping between them. And this actually mentally is a lot more tiring than focusing on one. So when we're designing our apps or applications, we should, wherever possible, make sure that we are letting the user focus on an activity at a point in time, and not trying to get them to focus on several different ones, as that's likely to not to produce as smooth or as enjoyable an experience for the user. Progressive disclosure is a particular way of aiding this process, so it's difficult to get the balance right here. Basically, for progressive disclosure, you don't present the user with a large clump of information all at the same time, as that can be overwhelming. The user has to sort of take it all in. They may be dragging off in different directions depending what information is presented. So with progressive disclosure, you say, okay, we're working on this task, we're at this particular phase, this is the information that's pertinent to the user at this point in time, and you provide that information. As you then progress further through the task, you provide additional pieces of information that are relevant to the stage. So the user only gets the information that he or she needs at a point in time. It works well if you can accurately, and accurately is probably the key word here, if you can accurately predict what it is the user is going to be working on, and you can accurately predict what it is the user is going to need by way of information at that point in time. And that actually is quite difficult to do for a lot of tasks. If you do it wrong, it means then that the user is saying, okay, well, I want to do this, but I don't see any information enabling me to do that. Well, why is that not there? You actually can end up confusing or frustrating the user. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword, but if you can do it and you test it with your user group to make sure that you can do it accurately, then this is a good thing to factor in. Recognition is easy, recall is hard. By that we mean that we can recognize things quickly, that if we look at something or see something or hear something, we can quite quickly associate that with other memories, names or functions or purposes. So recognition, that's easy for us. Recall is where we don't have any visual or auditory or textual cues, and we have to remember the name or the function of something. So if it's a search term and I have to remember, okay, or to recall what that search term should be to elicit whatever information is desirable. That's actually a lot more difficult for us to do. So we want to create an interface where we don't require the user to have to be able to recall precisely the steps. Rather, there's enough information on the screen that they enable them to visually recognize, that does that, or this leads into that. And that makes it a lot more limited effort for the user in terms of processing through it. Icons, pictures, we actually recognize these very quickly, more so than words. So wherever possible, you should favor a graphical icon if it ties in clearly with the purpose. And remember there that reading isn't something that's natural. We have to group the character symbols into word chunks and then to recognize that and understand what that word chunk is. Things like pictures, we're actually wired up to recognize them very quickly indeed. And we can then quite happily associate other things with those pictures. Just as an aside, they sort of looked at this here, that if you are to draw an icon, actually, there's lots of different icons and we're generally good for recalling all of them, and you want to pick one that ties in with the visual feel of your application. But all other things being equal, if you use icons which have a canonical perspective, so these are things which are almost 3D, that we seem to be looking slightly above and slightly down at them, that's actually the easiest perspective for us to be able to quickly recognize what an icon represents. For feeling motivated, obviously we want to have a motivated user in terms of using our application. A couple of different aspects that tend to lend people to feel motivated. One is that they feel they're in control, they're deciding what it is they want to do, and they are making progress towards whatever it is they want to do. So we want to establish and to let the user know, okay, how far they've went or how close to the goal that they are becoming. And the shorter the distance to the goal, so the closer the goal appears to be, then actually the more motivated the user is to reach that particular goal. What that means then is that in our application we should go out of our way to make it clear to the user their progress, how they are stepping through this, how close they are actually to being able to get to the end of it and reaching whatever goal they have. They're small things, but actually they help keep the user sort of motivated and on task. Interesting claim, we are inherently lazy as a species, but we're lazy for reasons of efficiency. So this is not necessarily a bad thing. We're saying we're inherently lazy, but efficiently so. But that's true, but it does have some implications then as to how we go about using apps and applications. The claim here is that good enough is just fine. That if you have an option that is, looks all right, then that is all right. It doesn't have to be perfect. And what this means then is that if you present the user with a whole bunch of options or different ways of doing things, now most of the time, not all of the time, sometimes something may be of particular importance to the user that they do want the best or a perfect outcome. But for most of the time, most of the actual apps or applications that we're using, we will sort of scan down through the information, we'll find something that sort of looks, that's probably all right, and that's what we will go with. It's a process known as satisficing, so it's a combination of satisfy and suffice. So it's sufficient to find an option that we find satisfactory. We generally are not driven to exhaustively search everything to find the perfect. And I say generally, in some cases we are, but most of the time we're not. This ties into really evolution, where again, how we're wired up is that it's important to make decisions quickly. It's important not to make bad decisions. Making a bad decision obviously has bad outcomes. But it's not essential to make an optimal one. If you do one that is good enough, that avoids bad consequences, and you can make it quickly, then that is a good decision-making basis. Reality is, for our ancestors, there may not have been opportunity to sit around and to ponder and think what is the best outcome. Rather, you may have had to make a decision, make it quickly, and go with it, and hopefully avoid any negative consequences. But that follows through into how we actually use interfaces nowadays. Quite like this one. This is a image from one of the recommended textbooks in this area. That's Don't Make Me Think, from Sir Krug's book, and it ties into some of the subtle ways that we actually can make quite a notable impact for the user. And this is Don't Make Me Think, and this is an example of how we can help the user not think by way of their use of our application. So let's say we've gone on to, let's say it's be a website, let's say for a company, and we're looking for job opportunities in that particular company. And we've got 3 ways we can do it here. And over on the left, we have a button with jobs. And that's easily recognizable, and the user will go, jobs, that's what I'm looking for, click straight on it. So little effort, easily recognized. The one in the middle is employment opportunities. So it takes longer to visually recognize that, to read it. There's a little bit of linkage there, employment opportunities, that means jobs, yeah, and then click on it. So not as immediate as the other one. Another one, you would see it, click. Employment opportunities, you would see it, you go, that's probably okay, and then click. The one on the right hand side which says Joborama, in that sense you end up going, okay, well it might be, it might not be, maybe there is another option that actually says jobs, maybe what is the Orama bit. So in this case we put the user in a situation where they need to pause, they need to actually stop and to ponder and think about, am I going to click on it or am I not going to click on it? It's not clear here. So this whole notion of Don't Make Me Think is really a way of saying that make your interface intuitive, obvious, one that the user can very easily, effortlessly navigate. Avoid things that, if you like, stalls that sort of automatic recognition that gets the user into a situation where they're not certain or they have to ponder or think about the interface. Lots of example in Sir Krug's book about how you can go about doing and designing that across a range of different types of interface. Final takeaways for our user experience series. We, as a species, we tend to satisfy. So we pick the first plausible option that we find and go with that. Particularly true if we're not trying to, the thing that we're doing is not of utter importance to us and we're just sort of browsing or navigating or doing things quite quickly. We obviously, we like interactions that are intuitive. things that don't require us to sort of pause and to think and to ponder. And if you had two different applications, one that was more intuitive to use and one that sort of slightly confused the user, had to get used to it, obviously they're going to migrate towards the more intuitive one. We should let our users focus on one task at a time and not try to burden them with multiple items. Give them the information that they need at that particular point in time. Again, we have to think carefully and to test the assumptions on this. We need to always let them know how close they are to meeting their particular goals. And if we adhere to these ones here, we generally will produce good quality interfaces. Now that's the end of, or if you like, exploration of UX design. Really, we've only sort of looked at some of the interface design aspects. Certainly would recommend the three textbooks we outlined it in the first user experience talk as some good directed reading in this subject.